Hi, today I'm joined by Stacy Nobles, who is a old colleague and friend of mine, and I'm really delighted to reconnect with her today because Stacy brings a very unique perspective to the world that we now find ourselves in. She's head of internal comms at Agios Pharmaceuticals, and she is managing a distributed workforce and all the communications around that. So Stacy, I'm really excited to be talking to you today and pick your brain a little bit about what you're seeing working well from an employee communications perspective, some of the challenges, things of that nature. So really appreciate you taking your time out today to join us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
So Stacy, quickly, just for those who are tuning in, just talk a little bit about your background and what your role at the pharmaceutical company is.
Yeah, so my background, as you mentioned, is kind of growing up in the agency world. And then I switched to in-house like many of us do and found myself leaving New York about 6 years ago. I spent about 15 years in New York, headed over to the Boston area, worked as a consultant for a few years in the Boston area, and ironically enough, ended up in pharmaceuticals by chance. Not primarily my background. My background had been more in technology and in professional services, but Agios had the foresight to look for somebody who was really an expert in internal communications, which is what I had spent the previous 5 years doing with companies like PricewaterhouseCoopers and Raytheon on big change initiatives and how do you really get employees to be engaged in those initiatives. And so Agios proactively called me and asked me to join the team, looking for that expertise and not necessarily caring that I didn't have a huge biotech background, which I thought was interesting and speaks a lot about their value of culture and employee engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. And doing what you do for the company, and getting thrown into this coronavirus crisis that we now face. I mean, all of us are going through this for the first time. So talk to me a little bit about what you are doing on the employee engagement front. How quickly sort of did you go from working in the office to becoming a distributed workforce and working from home? And how are you trying to maintain the culture of the company while working remotely with everyone?
Yeah, ironically enough, I actually think this is where my background really helped them in that I wasn't so wrapped up in a lot of the day-to-day of the biotech. So I could take a step back and say, really, what's most important here is the health and well-being of our people. And that's definitely something that our leadership team agreed with right from the start. It's one of the reasons I think we have always had a very unique culture. So we were actually one of the first biotechs to issue a stay-at-home order ahead of the state of Massachusetts. We issued it on March 10th. We even closed most of our labs down, which is obviously vital to our business research portfolio. But we decided that the most primarily important thing was that our employees stayed safe, that their loved ones stayed safe, and that we were able to continue to provide our medicines. Realize we have more than 50% of our employees have kids ages 0 to 18. So once the school closures started, we had to acknowledge that. We had to show employees, we get that. The more authentic you can be, the better. This is something obviously all communicators know, but we kind of reinforced one of our core values, which is that we really trust our people to be who they are. It's one of our hiring practices. We hire people based on who they are, and we want them to be who they are, their whole selves. So we made it clear that we trust them, and we know that they're going to manage in a way that works best for them and their families. Whether that you have to block some time on your calendar because your significant other has a call, you have to do some schoolwork with your child. Everything goes right now. It's kind of just you do what you need to do, and then we know that you will always keep our patients front and center as well.
So you're really taking that sort of flexible approach and understanding that people are grappling with a lot of things right now that even outside of work that they've never had to deal with before. Have you found sort of this mixing of personal and professional lives I found it to actually be a good thing, almost like a silver lining to all this, that I've learned more about the people I work with just by Zooming with them and seeing what their homes are like and what the activity is behind them happening. Are you finding that same thing happen for your employees as well?
Absolutely. In fact, it's kind of funny. We do this thing, it's very common in the biotech industry that we call BAWA every Thursday. It's called Beer and Wine After Hours. So we obviously can't be doing that right now. But what organically started to happen was little virtual BAWAs. People still wanted to get together with their glass of wine at 4 o'clock on a Thursday and just talk about, oh my God, can you believe this? And we would do little informal coffee connections once a week as well among teams. So yeah, I've definitely found that interesting. I think people are getting to know each other more on a personal level. We have always been a pretty close knit, open culture. So this was really hard for us to move to virtual because people kind of thrive on that face to face. So I think that it's a good thing for those employees that we don't have in the office in Cambridge to have us all experience this, because now we kind of get what it's like to be them and to not maybe be part of
Hmm.
the headquarters office. So
Right.
we're being like a little bit more mindful about making sure that when you send a meeting that you have a WebEx connection, that you can turn on your video, because people are always so afraid to turn on their video. I think that sort of thing is becoming a little bit more normal. And we have a rotating carousel of what we're calling our virtual Elfies on our intranet. So we have lots of pictures of people working from home. And to your point, now we have pictures of people with their kids and their dogs and, all the things that bring them joy outside of work.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've heard a lot of folks talk about that. Corporate cultures that are very used to working in person, but have also sort of tapped into remote workers from time to time. They now have this whole new appreciation for how challenging it can be a remote worker, especially if you're dealing with folks who are in person most of the time. It sounds like that's been a big learning lesson for you and your team. Do you think that'll sort of forever change your approach to communicating internally, even after this lockdown phase ends?
Yeah, I do think so. I mean, we have an intranet in place. We didn't really have what I would call a robust intranet when I joined about a year ago, because they didn't have somebody in my role who kind of owned it. So I'm finding that it's actually really helping me change behaviors. People are now going to it. We've created a stay-at-home hub where we have different tips and resources on ways to engage kids, ways to work from afar, ways to learn. One of the really big things we have is a section on ways to help and give back. I can talk about that a little bit more in a second. But we've always embraced flexibility. That's something, it's one of the reasons I joined the company. They're very into seeing flexibility as about being individual needs. So not just about letting people work from home. It's not one size fits all. It's a culture that really promotes different perspectives, different work styles, health and wellness, that care of your family, and productivity. Realizing that if people aren't happy and if they're not feeling like they can work the way they want to work, whatever that means to them, they're not going to be as productive. So I think that this has been, if you have to look at a positive, it's been a real positive in terms of letting people realize that it is okay. You can figure it out. You can figure out other ways to work, and things get done. Maybe not quite the same way with everybody working virtually when you have a company base where you have to be in a lab. But that you can do this. And I think people will be a little less shy about turning on the video and reaching out that way.
And talk a little bit about giving back and what you're doing there. That sounds
Yeah.
interesting. I think people would like to know more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we, as part of the stay-at-home hub, we had so many people just start writing in about what can we do, what can we be doing. It speaks a lot about the nature of people who work in healthcare, for the most part, especially in the smaller biotechs. They're really people who want to make a difference and who care about patients. So we started just by putting some tips to resources like blood donations and things of that nature that were vetted so that people knew that they could trust where it was coming from. And then our CEO offered to donation match to the Greater Boston Food Bank. So I posted that, I think, on a Friday. By Monday, we had accumulated $22,000, and we're the #1 organization on Greater Boston Food Bank. So it just speaks a lot to the
Right.
types of people who work there. This isn't necessarily a way to give back, but another thing, just talking about our patients, right? Talking about the fact that there are some people who need medications that depend on our medications to stay in remission. So we have a patient who lives in Cairo, Egypt, who's enrolled in a clinical trial of one of our medications. He's been taking the drug for 4 years, and he typically flies to Houston for his clinical trial study visit. But it became very clearly he was not going to be able to do that for this next visit, with everything shutting down, and with apparently Cairo airport was about to shut down.
Right.
So when we heard about this, our team quickly coordinated with physicians at Houston study site to use a concierge like drug delivery courier to pick up the doses of our medication in Texas and fly it to Egypt. And we flew it to Egypt at 11:30 p.m. right before the airport shut down.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So
That's just an
stories
incredible
like
story.
that. Yeah. That's the kind of stuff like that I've been trying to share more of,
Right.
because we're doing those types of things all the time. And that reminds people of why it's so important that they still try to maintain some productivity, why they still try to maintain some of their priorities as much as they can, because patients are really counting on us. And that makes it huge.
Yeah, you know, it's one of sort of the almost hidden stories of this whole crisis is that, you know, with so much focus being on the battle against coronavirus, and rightfully so, you know, people who suffer from other diseases, life-threatening diseases like cancer, heart disease, et cetera, still need to be cared for and still need to be treated. And, you know, that's an amazing story of just doing whatever it takes to get that patient help.
Yeah.
So lastly, where do you what do you think's next? Like, as let's just sort of hypothesize for a sec, you know, eventually these lockdowns will get lifted. There'll be probably some sort of phased approach back into work, meaning working in an office setting with other individuals. Where do you see, from an employee communication standpoint, what are you thinking about as you kind of enter in or get closer to those subsequent phases?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, like we had touched upon earlier, I think that it's going to definitely keep some of those employees who aren't in your home office top of mind more so than it would have before. It was something I always thought about. I was always mindful of, especially somebody who had worked in a virtual environment prior to this role. But now even more so, realizing how isolating it can be and how you have that need to connect. So I think I'll be a little bit more creative when we do start to phase back into the office about, can I do virtual bawas? You know, how do we include those employees who can't have a beer or wine in our Cambridge office? Are there other things we can do? Can I make my intranet a little bit more dynamic and more have a social media slant to it, and have some gamification on our intranet to really encourage people to interact with each other that way? So I think the use of technology is going to be changed forever. And I think probably in a good way. I think where we had this situation where we're constantly concerned about our kids' faces being in their phones, and we'll still have that issue, we have realized there's some good in this technology. I think this has really brought to light that you can do, you know, art exchanges, you can do music collaborations together. There's a lot of other things you can do that are in fact social, that aren't just hiding behind text. And I think that type of thing will be embraced more. So I'm trying to think of that and how I evolve that and use that a little bit more in my communications.
Yeah, that's really smart. And I think you're right. I think when you go through a crisis that's so acute like this one, it forces you to become more creative and to think about, how do you reinvent something that you totally either took for granted or didn't think needed changing beforehand. So you know, hopefully some of that positive can come out of it. And I do think for a period of time, at least for the foreseeable future, even when we return to work, we'll likely be working in a dual setting, right? Where there's more remote working than there ever has been before, coupled with going into physical locations and convening and collaborating. And even that's going to look different, obviously, with social distancing and all that. So, you know, a lot still has to sort of pan out, and I'm sure, you know, lots more changes will occur. But I'm going to leave it there for now. Stacy, really appreciate you taking the time. It's great to reconnect with you, and I wish you and the company nothing but the best, and hope you and everyone stay sound and healthy.
Thanks, Ted. You too.